This is BBC News. I'm Lucy Hockings. Our top stories. Russia launches a full-scale invasion on Ukraine. Ukrainian CCTV captures these images of the Russian military crossing the border from Crimea to the south. Missiles have struck key targets in the capital and in the east of Ukraine. Ukraine's president issues this update.
Russia has carried out strikes on our military infrastructure and on our border guards and border detachments. Explosions were heard in many cities of Ukraine. We are imposing martial law in all regions of our state.
Long queues continue to build up, people trying to desperately leave the capital to escape the conflict. Ukraine has appealed for people to come forward if they want to stay and fight. Russian tanks are already reported to be in Ukraine's second city of Kharkiv, and within the past few minutes, NATO has condemned Russia's actions as brutal and cold-blooded, but ruled out sending its own troops into Ukraine. Hello and welcome to BBC News. We start with some breaking news, some reaction to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has just released this statement.
Shortly after 4 o'clock this morning, I spoke to President Zelensky of Ukraine to offer the continued support of the UK, because our worst fears have now come true and all our warnings have proved tragically accurate. President Putin of Russia has unleashed war in our European continent. He's attacked a friendly country without any provocation and without any credible excuse. Innumerable missiles and bombs have been raining down on an entirely innocent population. A vast invasion is underway by land, by sea, and by air. And this is not, in the infamous phrase, some faraway country of which we know little. We have Ukrainian friends in this country, neighbours, co-workers. Ukraine is a country that for decades has enjoyed freedom and democracy and the right to choose its own destiny. We and the world cannot allow that freedom just to be snuffed out. We cannot and will not just look away. It's because we've been so alarmed in recent months at Russian intimidation that the UK became one of the first countries in Europe to send defensive weaponry to help the Ukrainians. Other allies have now done the same, and we will do what more we can in the days ahead. Today, in concert with our allies, we will agree a massive package of economic sanctions designed in time to hobble the Russian economy. And to that end, we must also collectively cease the dependence on Russian oil and gas that for too long has given Putin his grip on Western politics. Our mission is clear. Diplomatically, politically, economically, and eventually militarily, this hideous and barbaric venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure. And so I say to the people of Russia, whose president has just authorized a tidal wave of violence against a fellow Slavic people, the parents of Russian soldiers who will lose their lives, I cannot believe this is being done in your name, or that you really want the pariah status it will bring to the Putin regime. And I say to the Ukrainians in this moment of agony, we are with you. We're praying for you and your families, and we are on your side. And if the months ahead are grim and the flame of freedom burns low, I know that it will blaze bright again in Ukraine, because for all his bombs and tanks and missiles, I don't believe that the Russian dictator will ever subdue the national feeling of the Ukrainians and their passionate belief that their country should be free. I say to the British people and all who have heard the threats from Putin against those who stand with Ukraine, we will of course do everything to keep our country safe. We're joined in our outrage by friends and allies around the world. We will work with them for however long it takes to ensure that the sovereignty and independence of Ukraine is restored. Because this act of wanton and reckless aggression is an attack not just on Ukraine, it's an attack on democracy and freedom in Eastern Europe and around the world. This crisis is about the right of a free, sovereign, independent European people to choose their own future. And that is a right that the UK will always defend.
The British Prime Minister there, Boris Johnson, that statement just being released. Rob Watson is with me now. So absolute outrage there from Boris Johnson, a strong sense of solidarity that he's expressing towards Ukraine, Rob. But any specifics or new specific detail about how Britain is going to respond?
Before we get to the specifics, I actually think the most important thing is the general point. I think this is huge. This is that the Prime Minister saying this mission must end in failure. In other words, that sort of recognition that we've moved beyond the Cold War. This is a moment of sort of global European crisis, and that idea that this is an attack on freedom and democracy. Because if you think about it, the UK and the rest of the West are sort of faced with a choice at this point. Do you kind of eventually normalise what Russia has done and accept it, no matter how unwillingly, or do you really make this about the future of your relationship with Russia, about the future of Vladimir Putin? And it suggests so far that the UK wants to go down that second path, that this cannot be allowed to stand, that this has to be us versus the West versus Putin.
We have heard similar words from Boris Johnson before, though, in the build-up to today and other interviews that he's done. So was there anything in what he just said, Rob, that was new in terms of sanctions?
Well, that brings us to the specifics, what you actually asked me about. So given that it appears that the UK's view that if you think of this as a sort of fork, a geopolitical fork in the road, with the UK saying, this cannot be allowed to stand, you say, OK, what are you going to do about it? And then, of course, you're drawn to this line about further military aid and massive coordinated sanctions. So I guess that is the next stage for us all to be watching. What exactly will be the sanctions that are agreed amongst the Western powers, and what military aid will there be, and will there be a kind of a Ukrainian military to give any assistance to, or will it collapse? Will it just not be able to stand for long?
OK, Rob, thank you so much. Well, let's bring you right up to date and recap the main developments in this rapidly unfolding crisis. To remind you, Russian forces have launched a military assault on Ukraine. They have crossed borders. They have bombed military targets near major cities. In a televised address, President Putin announced what he called a special military operation in the Donbas region, aimed at the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. Russia saying it's targeting military infrastructure with missile strikes and military convoys reported across Ukraine. We've seen world leaders in the past few hours strongly condemning this offensive. There have been emergency sessions of parliament, legislatures and organizations being called for right now. And as for President Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, he says his country's armed forces are involved in heavy fighting. He has called on citizens to be ready to defend the country and to come forward if they are prepared to do so, and said the government will issue weapons to those who do volunteer. Well, let's show you where Russian military convoys have been entering Ukraine. It's been from all directions, including from neighbouring Belarus. We can show you where there have been reported airstrikes as well in Ukraine. Strikes happening near 8 major cities, including the capital, Kiev. It includes a strike at the international airport in the city of Ivano-Frankivsk. These pictures have not been filmed that we're about to show you now by the BBC, but they have been verified by us. So those are pictures from the airport near Kiev. Well, we have heard from Ukraine's president giving a statement in the last hour or so. He says his people, President Zelensky says, will not give up their freedom.